Under the shining towers of the Imperial Dragon Palace, where glowing crystals lit the golden walls and the air itself carried the weight of dragon power mixed with strange futuristic technology, silence ruled the Grand Hall. The Dragon Emperor sat upon his throne of black stone carved with ancient runes, his eyes glowing like fire beneath a crown forged from molten gold. He was feared across the galaxy, respected even by those who had never set foot on his world. To the people, he was not only a ruler but a legend, and legends were never questioned. Yet even legends could feel the prickling shadow of doubt when something in their world did not fit, and on this day, he noticed something small, something fragile, something that would change everything. His maid, a young human girl with tired eyes and a quiet step, entered the chamber carrying a tray of crystal goblets. Her hands trembled just enough for the Emperor to notice, though she tried to steady them. She moved like a shadow, careful not to make a sound, as though she feared even the whisper of her breath might disturb him. But the Dragon Emperor saw everything, his gaze was sharper than blades, and nothing escaped his notice. As she approached the throne, a sleeve of her simple grey dress slid back slightly, just enough to reveal the faint dark stain of a bruise on her arm. It was not large, not bleeding, not obvious to anyone else, but to the Emperor it burned like fire in his vision. His hand tightened on the throne armrest, claws scraping against stone, the sound echoing in the vast silence. A bruise inside the palace was not just a mark of pain, it was a question, a threat, a hidden story. In his halls, no one dared to touch a servant without permission. No one dared to leave a mark without his knowing. So who had done this? The maid lowered her head quickly, as though hoping the shadow of her hair would hide her shame. But she was too late. The Emperor had already seen, and once seen, nothing could be unseen. He leaned forward slowly, his burning eyes fixed on her trembling figure. The girl froze, her steps halting, her tray shaking as the goblets rattled like nervous hearts. For a moment the Emperor said nothing. He allowed the silence to stretch, heavy and suffocating, until it felt as though the walls themselves were listening. Then, his voice cut through the stillness, deep and commanding, filled with quiet fire. "Who placed that mark upon you?" The girl flinched, her grip tightening on the tray. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. She lowered her eyes to the floor, her chest rising and falling quickly as fear consumed her. The Emperor did not repeat the question. He did not need to. His gaze was sharper than any blade, his voice heavier than any weight. Still, the girl said nothing, and the silence itself became her answer. The Emperor's mind, sharp and ruthless, began to race. This was not an accident. He had ruled long enough to know the difference between chance and intention. A bruise in his palace was not a mistake, it was a message. Someone had dared to touch what was his, dared to mark the smallest part of his world, knowing the risk. But why? What secret was hidden in that mark? What truth pressed so hard against the walls of the palace that it left bruises on the skin of the powerless? The Emperor's claws tapped once against the armrest, a sound that made the maid flinch as though struck. She shook her head faintly, eyes glistening with unshed tears, her lips trembling with words that refused to leave her mouth. He saw it all, the fear, the silence, the pain, and behind it, the weight of something larger, something she dared not reveal. The air grew heavier, as though the very crystals in the walls dimmed in response to the tension. Servants in the distance moved slower, careful not to draw attention, while guards at the edge of the chamber straightened with unease. They too had seen the bruise now, and like their emperor, they understood what it meant. Someone inside the palace was not loyal, someone inside the palace was dangerous. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, glowing brighter as fire burned in his chest. He rose from his throne, his presence filling the chamber like a storm. The maid shook visibly, clutching the tray to her chest, whispering something too soft for anyone else to hear. But the Emperor heard it. He always heard everything. A broken whisper, no louder than the beat of a moth's wing. They said, the Emperor must never know. His heart, so long guarded by armor of stone and flame, tightened with rage. Never know. What secret could shake his empire so deeply that others would risk everything to keep it from him? And why had they chosen to warn him by hurting the weakest of all? He stepped forward, each stride echoing through the golden halls, and the maid fell to her knees, the tray clattering against the marble floor. Goblets shattered, fragments scattering like falling stars, but no one dared to move. No one dared to breathe. The Emperor stood above her, his shadow stretching across the floor like a beast ready to consume. For the first time in many years, there was doubt in the heart of the Dragon Emperor, Not doubt of his strength, not doubt of his rule, but doubt of the silence that had grown inside his own palace. He looked down at the girl, his voice colder than ice, sharper than blades. "Bring me the Imperial Guard," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for question. The words thundered through the hall, and the guards moved at once, their armor glowing faintly as they marched toward the hidden corners of the palace. Something had broken in his world, something that had left its mark not only on the skin of a servant but on the empire itself. The golden silence of the throne room had been shattered by the Emperor's command, and now the echo of marching boots thundered through the endless marble corridors of the palace. The Imperial Guard, wrapped in gleaming armor lined with glowing veins of energy, assembled before the throne. Each one carried a weapon forged of both dragon fire and futuristic alloy, weapons that had cut down enemies in every corner of the galaxy. Yet as they stood in formation, their gazes flickering briefly toward the kneeling Maid, unease spread among them. They could sense it too, something was wrong, something poisonous had seeped into the heart of the palace. The Emperor's eyes glowed hotter as he looked down at the girl who had still not lifted her face from the floor. Her voice had broken through the silence once, with a whisper that refused to leave his mind. They said the Emperor must never know. Who were they? What did they fear so much? And what truth was so dangerous that it left a bruise on a maid rather than ink on parchment? The Emperor stepped down from his throne, his tall figure towering over her, his long cloak trailing like smoke across the polished floor. His presence was crushing, his power undeniable, but still she said nothing. Her hands shook as if she wanted to speak, yet every word caught in her throat like a knife. "You fear them more than me," the Emperor said, his voice low and dangerous, each word dripping with fire. The girl flinched, the tray still shattered at her knees, shards glittering like stars around her small figure. She pressed her bruised arm to her chest as though to shield it from his gaze. His anger deepened, not at her, but at the shadow that dared to terrify her within his walls. The guards shifted uneasily, their captain stepping forward, bowing low. "Sire, give the order. We will find who did this." His voice was sharp, loyal, but the Emperor raised one clawed hand to silence him. "Not yet," the ruler answered coldly, his burning eyes never leaving the maid. "First, she will tell me what she saw." The girl shook her head violently, her hair falling over her face like a curtain. Tears stained the floor. "If I speak, they will kill me," she whispered, voice trembling with fear. The Emperor's chest rumbled, a low growl escaping his throat. "If you do not speak, I will assume you are already dead," he said. His words were brutal, heavy, but necessary. For the truth to live, fear had to die. She gasped at his cruelty, but her heart knew his meaning. He was not her enemy. He was her shield. Yet still, she hesitated, torn between terror and duty. Her silence only made the hall heavier. Even the torches of dragon fire flickered as though the palace itself listened for her answer. The Emperor leaned closer, his voice dropping into a softer tone, though no less dangerous. "Child, there is no force in this galaxy greater than mine. No shadow can kill you under my wings. Speak, and I will burn the hand that touched you." His words were a promise, sharp and absolute. Slowly, painfully, the maid lifted her head. Her eyes were wet, her lips trembling. She looked not at the Emperor but at the floor between them. "I was cleaning the lower halls," she whispered, her voice breaking, "and I heard them. Men and women, but not like us. Not fully human. Not fully dragon." They whispered in the dark, their faces hidden. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, fire burning brighter. "What did they say?" he demanded. The maid's voice quivered, each word like glass cutting her tongue. "They said, the throne must fall. They said the Emperor must never see what they are building beneath the palace. When they saw me, they struck me. They said if I spoke, they would." Her voice broke into sobs. She could not finish. The throne room went still. The Emperor's fury filled the silence. Beneath his calm surface, his rage was volcanic, pressing to erupt. The palace, the heart of his power, his legacy, his empire, had been infected with betrayal. Someone had dared to build secrets under his very claws. His wings unfurled slightly, filling the hall with shadows and firelight. The guards shifted in fear and awe. The Emperor spoke at last, his voice ringing with steel. "Then the shadows will regret leaving a witness alive." He turned sharply, his cloak sweeping across the broken shards on the floor. His gaze fell upon the captain of the Imperial Guard. Lock down the palace. No one enters. No one leaves. The rats have been bold enough to scratch at my walls, but tonight their blood will answer. The captain bowed, striking his fist against his chest. As you command, my emperor. The guards moved at once, splitting into units, their armor clattering like thunder as they disappeared into the corridors, sealing doors, closing passageways, surrounding the halls. The air became a cage, and inside it the emperor stood as both hunter and judge. The maid still trembled, her sobs echoing softly, but the emperor placed one massive clawed hand above her head, not touching, but casting a shadow over her like a shield. You have done enough, he said. Stay silent now. I will carry the rest. She nodded weakly, tears staining her cheeks, but a glimmer of relief shone in her eyes. For the first time, she believed his words. Under his wings, no shadow could touch her. The emperor turned once more, his steps echoing like drums of war. His mind burned with possibilities. A faction inside his palace, neither human nor dragon, plotting in secret tunnels, building something hidden. The bruise on the maid was not an accident. It was a warning. A sign of enemies closer than ever before. His tail lashed once against the marble floor, leaving a crack that spread like lightning. The guards would search, the traitors would be found, and when they were dragged before him, their screams would echo louder than their whispers. But still, one question gnawed at him. What were they building beneath his palace that he must never see? As he reached the great doors of the hall, his voice rose again, cold and final. Let the shadows tremble. Tonight, the emperor hunts. And with that, the golden silence of the palace shattered again, this time not from fear, but from the storm of fire that was about to fall upon those who thought themselves hidden. The palace that once felt eternal and unshakable now carried the weight of unease. The walls of golden marble still gleamed under the light of burning crystal torches, yet in the silence between footsteps there was something else, a tension, a whisper, a warning that danger lurked just beyond the reach of the eye. The Dragon Emperor strode through the endless corridors, his cloak trailing like a dark shadow, his fiery eyes glowing with fury. Behind him, the Imperial Guard spread out in disciplined formation, their armor humming with energy, their weapons held ready. These were not ordinary soldiers, they were bred and trained for loyalty, for precision, for war. But even they, unflinching and fearless, felt the weight of the Emperor's rage pressing down on them as they followed his command. The order had been clear: seal the palace, lock every door, guard every passage. No servant, no merchant, no shadow was allowed to leave. The palace, a jewel of power, had now become a cage. And inside this cage, the Emperor was hunting. He was a predator not of flesh alone but of secrets, and tonight's secrets had nowhere left to run. The maid had been escorted to safety, hidden under heavy guard, her broken whispers still ringing in the Emperor's ears. They said the Emperor must never know. Those words were poison, and he could not let poison linger. If traitors had been bold enough to touch her, bold enough to strike inside his halls, then the disease ran deeper than a bruise. It spread like rot, waiting in the dark. The Emperor's fury was not only for the girl, not only for the insult to his rule, but for the revelation that someone dared to defy him under his own roof. His palace was supposed to be the heart of his empire, the one place unbroken by shadows. Yet now he knew, someone had been building something beneath his throne, something meant to destroy him. The investigation began at once. The guards split into teams, sweeping corridors with mechanical precision. Every door was searched, every servant questioned, every hidden passage scanned by glowing instruments forged from both science and dragon flame. The Emperor's palace had been designed to withstand armies, but now those same walls echoed with the metallic rhythm of boots and the occasional hiss of blades as soldiers opened panels, pried apart vents, and scanned every inch of the marble floors. The Emperor himself moved among them, his presence both a command and a warning. He was not a ruler sitting idle on a throne, he was fire in motion, and wherever he walked, the guards moved faster, sharper, as if his fury itself gave them strength. Hours passed, and yet the palace yielded nothing but fear. Servants stammered under questioning, too afraid to lie yet too terrified to tell the full truth. Some claimed they had seen shadows moving in the lower halls. Others spoke of doors that were locked one night and missing the next. A few whispered of strange sounds rising from the underlevels, metal clashing, voices chanting in languages they did not know. Each word added fuel to the Emperor's fire. Every clue painted a darker picture. Betrayal had lived here for longer than he realized. The bruises on the Maid were not the beginning. They were the final warning before something greater was unleashed. At last, one of the guards came rushing to him, bowing low, his breath sharp with urgency. "Sire," he said, voice trembling despite his armor. "We found it." The Emperor's eyes blazed brighter. "Show me." The guard led him down into the lower passages of the palace, where the air grew colder and the crystals burned dimmer. These halls were rarely used, meant for servants and storage, forgotten by most. Yet even here, the Emperor felt the shift in the air, the faint vibration beneath the stone floor, like a heartbeat too far below. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. Something lived here, something hidden, something that should not exist. At the end of one narrow corridor, the guards had forced open a wall panel. Behind it, not stone but metal glimmered, dark and unnatural, laced with glowing veins of crimson energy. A secret door, one not built by his architects, one carved in silence while he ruled above. The Emperor stepped forward, his claw tracing the edge of the hidden entrance, and for the first time that night he felt it, a hum of power, not his own, not dragon, not human. Something foreign, something dangerous. His voice was quiet but sharp as blades. "Open it." The guards obeyed, their weapons raised as the metal door hissed and slid aside. Behind it stretched a stairwell descending into blackness. The air that escaped was heavy, metallic, foul with secrets. The Emperor descended first, his steps like thunder, the guards following close behind. Torches of dragon flame ignited in his hands, casting firelight down into the abyss. The deeper they went, the more the palace above felt like another world. Here, the walls were not golden but dark and scarred, covered in strange marks and symbols that twisted in the torchlight. The air grew thicker, buzzing faintly as if alive. And then they reached it. A chamber vast and unnatural, carved into the very foundations of the palace. Crystals hung from the ceiling, but their glow was sickly and dim. Machines hummed, machines unlike any the Emperor had ever permitted within his empire, dark engines fused with dragon bone, wires pulsing with crimson light. At the center of the chamber stood a great circle of metal and stone, its surface alive with energy, a gateway pulsing with shadows. Around it lay fragments of armor, scales, and tools marked by both human and dragon hands. His guards spread out, their weapons trembling in their grips as they saw what had been built here. It was not only treason, it was something worse. The Emperor stood at the heart of the chamber, fire blazing in his chest. His claws curled into fists. "They dared," he whispered, his voice heavy with wrath. "They dared to build this in my house." His eyes burned with realization. This was no simple conspiracy. This was a weapon, a creation forged by hands both human and dragon, meant to open something beyond the world he ruled. And his maid had been bruised not only to silence her but to protect this chamber from being known. The Emperor turned slowly, his firelight casting shadows across the walls. He knew one truth now, the traitors were not planning rebellion. They were planning something far greater, something that threatened not just his throne but the galaxy itself. And he would burn it all before he let them succeed. The hidden chamber beneath the imperial palace pulsed with a sick light, its walls alive with crimson veins of energy that seemed to breathe like a living beast. The Dragon Emperor stood at its center, fire flickering in his chest, his wings stretching wide enough to brush the scarred stone walls. His guards fanned out, their weapons raised, but none dared move too quickly. The machines around them hissed and clicked, their alien design a marriage of forbidden science and stolen dragon power. Some parts were shaped from bone, others from glowing alloy, all fused into a structure that no loyal subject would have dared to create. It was a secret built in silence, under his very claws, and its existence was more dangerous than 1,000 armies at his gates. The Emperor's voice filled the chamber, cold and sharp. "Who built this?" His words echoed off the walls, unanswered. His gaze cut across the strange devices, the circle of metal and stone at the chamber's heart, its surface humming with unstable energy. He knew at once this was not the work of loyal engineers, nor of sanctioned scholars. This was the work of traitors, of outcasts who had dared to twist his empire's power into something unnatural. His claws scraped against the stone floor, sparks bursting where they touched. "This is no rebellion," he growled to himself. "This is a betrayal of blood." The guards moved cautiously among the machines, their torches of dragon flame casting shifting shadows across twisted wires and ancient runes etched into metal. One of them called out, "Sire, these markings, they are not ours." They are written in both human code and dragon script, but changed. Corrupted. The Emperor approached, his eyes narrowing as he studied the markings. They were indeed familiar, but wrong, bent in ways that spoke of forbidden craft. He recognized fragments of language meant to bind, to conceal, to twist energy into submission. Whoever had written these words knew both the human sciences and the dragon's deepest arts. They had fused them into something new, something dangerous enough to hide beneath his throne. Another guard stumbled upon fragments of armor, scattered on the floor near the great circle. He lifted one piece and froze. It was scaled, but not like the scales of true dragons. It was duller, thinner, artificial, as though crafted in imitation rather than born of blood. He carried it to the Emperor and knelt. "My lord, this is no soldier of yours." The Emperor took the fragment in his claw, his fiery gaze burning into it. He felt no life within the scale, no spirit, only emptiness and steel. He dropped it to the floor where it clattered like hollow bone. "They are making something," he said darkly. "Not dragons, not humans. Something else." As if summoned by his words, a low vibration rippled through the chamber. The machines hummed louder, their crimson veins glowing brighter, and the great circle at the center flickered with energy. The guards stepped back, raising their weapons, but the Emperor did not move. He stared into the shifting surface of the circle, watching as shapes began to stir within it. Faint outlines moved like shadows trapped in glass. The maid's whispers returned to him. They said the Emperor must never know. Now he understood why. This was no secret meeting, no rebellion whispered in corridors. This was a creation, a gate, a weapon meant to pierce the walls of his empire. The Emperor's fire roared inside him, but he forced himself to stay still, to watch, to understand. He would destroy it, yes, but only once he knew the full scope of the treachery. His guards, however, were less patient. "Sire," the captain said, his voice low but urgent, "we should strike it down now before it awakens further." The Emperor turned his burning gaze on him, silencing him with a single look. "Not yet. If I destroy it blindly, I destroy knowledge. I must see what beast dares breathe in my halls." The chamber grew colder as the energy from the circle spread across the floor, veins of crimson light crawling toward the walls like roots searching for blood. The guards shifted nervously, their boots crunching against fragments of bone and metal. One torch flickered and died, swallowed by the unnatural air. Then came the sound, faint at first, like whispers carried through water. Not one voice but many, layered and overlapping, speaking in a language older than the palace itself. The Emperor understood none of the words, yet he felt their weight press against his chest. And then, movement. A hand, pale and clawed, pressed against the inside of the circle's surface, its fingers scraping as though trying to break free. The guards gasped, forming a defensive line around the Emperor, but he did not flinch. His wings rose higher, his fire burned brighter. He had ruled over empires, crushed rebellions, ended wars with a single command. But this was different. This was something born not of loyalty or defiance, but of creation twisted into abomination. The hand withdrew, and the surface stilled, though the energy around it still pulsed. The Emperor's voice cut through the chamber, steady and unshaken. "They are building an army," he declared. "Not of dragons, not of humans. An army that belongs to nothing but the shadows." His guards exchanged uneasy glances. None dared to question him, for they saw the truth in the fragments, in the machines, in the whispering voices still echoing faintly. This was no rebellion that sought the throne. This was a plot to unmake the very balance of the galaxy. The Emperor turned to his captain, his eyes burning brighter than ever before. "Double the guard. Lock down the lower halls. No one breathes a word of this beyond these walls. The traitors have hidden themselves deep, but now I will drag them into the light." The captain bowed, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "Yes, my Emperor." As the guards began to carry out his command, the Emperor lingered by the circle, staring into its faintly glowing surface. His reflection shimmered on it, but behind his image he could still see shadows, waiting, pressing, testing the barrier. He bared his fangs, his claws curling. The traitors thought him blind, thought his eyes would never pierce their darkness. But now he had seen. Now he knew. And soon, they would learn what it meant to provoke the Dragon Emperor. As he turned away, his firelight casting long shadows across the machines, he made his vow in silence. Before the next dawn, the palace would bleed secrets, and the traitors who had bruised a maid to protect their work would beg for mercy that would never come. The Emperor would not rest until every shadow was burned away. The palace above still gleamed with its golden light, but beneath its foundations the Dragon Emperor had uncovered the cancer that gnawed at its heart. The secret chamber with its unnatural machines and the whispering circle of stone was proof enough, but proof was never enough for him. He needed truth, he needed names, and he needed to see the traitors bleed before his eyes. For the Emperor was no fool, he knew shadows were clever, and lies wore many masks. If they could build such a thing under his very throne, then they had already woven themselves into his court like worms into fruit. The bruise on the maid had been a warning, yes, but also a message. She had seen too much. And if she had seen, then others had too. That night, he summoned her once more, bringing her into a chamber lit only by blue fire. She stood trembling before him, her dress torn from her earlier fall, her eyes swollen from fear. She expected punishment, perhaps even death, for speaking out. But instead, the Emperor lowered himself from his throne and stood closer to her than ever before. His voice was not thunder now but a low growl, a promise and a demand all in one. Tell me what you heard. Every word. Do not leave even a whisper behind. Her lips trembled, her hands shaking as she pressed them together. They met in the lower halls, she began, her voice unsteady. I was cleaning when I heard them speaking. Their voices were strange. Some human, some dragon, but twisted. Not right. They spoke of you, my lord. They said your reign had lasted too long. They said the galaxy had no more need for dragons. Her eyes darted up to him, then down again, as though ashamed to speak such treason aloud. One of them, he struck me when he saw me. He said if I told anyone, I would never see the sun again. He said, she broke off, tears spilling over her cheeks. The Emperor's fire burned hotter in his chest, though he kept it contained. He said what? His voice was sharp, demanding. She swallowed hard. He said the throne will fall when the gate is ready. He said you must never know what lies beyond it. Silence gripped the chamber. The Emperor's claws dug into the marble floor, scoring deep lines across its surface. His worst fear was now confirmed. The machine was not just a weapon, it was a gate, a doorway to something else, something waiting to step into his world. And his enemies had been building it beneath his claws, waiting for the day to unleash it upon him. The Emperor turned away from the trembling maid, his wings flaring slightly in the dim firelight. He spoke not to her but to the shadows themselves. So they plot to open the door, and they think I will stand blind. His voice grew louder, rising to fill the chamber. Then they will learn what happens when shadows defy fire. The captain of the guard entered, his armor scorched from searching the lower levels. He bowed low. My lord, we found more evidence. Footprints in the dust, food stores hidden in the walls. They have been living down there, working for months, perhaps years. His voice faltered. They are not gone, sire. They are still inside your palace. The Emperor's head turned sharply, his burning gaze pinning the captain in place. Good, he said, his tone like molten iron. Then they cannot escape. The guards moved swiftly, spreading through the palace like a net of fire. Hidden corridors were forced open, ancient passageways sealed for centuries were pried apart. In the kitchens, in the servant halls, even in the great library, signs of secret gatherings were found, scraps of parchment, coded markings, shards of artificial scales left behind in haste. Slowly, the truth formed a shape. The traitors had not come from outside. They were born here, nurtured in the very belly of the palace, feeding off its strength. It was near midnight when the Emperor returned to the hidden chamber beneath the palace. This time he came not as a watcher but as a destroyer. The circle at the center still pulsed faintly, its whispers growing bolder, its surface shimmering as though something pressed harder from the other side. He stood before it, his fire burning so bright it cast shadows into corners the torches could not reach. Show yourself, he growled at the gate. Let me see what my enemies worship. For a moment, nothing. Then the surface rippled, and the faint outline of a figure appeared, tall, twisted, neither dragon nor human. Its face was blurred, but its voice came clear, echoing from beyond. Your throne is built on lies, Emperor. Your time has ended. The galaxy does not need chains of fire. It needs freedom. The guards raised their weapons, but the Emperor lifted a claw to silence them. His voice thundered back, a roar that shook the chamber. You speak of freedom, yet you hide like rats beneath my floor. You bruise children and call it power. You build shadows because you fear the sun. You are no freedom, you are cowardice dressed in blood. The shadow's form wavered, but its voice did not. When the gate opens, you will fall. And your empire will burn with you. The Emperor's fire flared so bright it cracked the stones beneath his feet. Then I will burn the gate itself. And when your hand reaches through, I will tear it off and crush it before your eyes. His words carried no doubt, no fear. They were a vow, carved into stone. The shadow faded, the whispers retreating back into silence, but the threat hung heavy in the air. The Emperor turned to his guards, his eyes blazing brighter than the crystals. Now we know. They are here, and they are many. But their gate is not yet finished. We will find them. We will drag them from their holes. And when they face my fire, they will wish they had never been born. The guards roared their agreement, their voices echoing through the chamber like thunder. The Emperor spread his wings wide, fire streaming from his chest. The traitors thought they had hidden long enough. They thought his eyes blind, his claws dull, his throne weak. But now, the hunt had begun, and there was no force in the galaxy that could stop the wrath of the Dragon Emperor. The night over the Imperial Dragon Palace stretched long, but no one inside slept. The golden spires that once symbolized glory and peace now seemed like weapons pointed toward the sky, and beneath them the Dragon Emperor prepared for the final act of his hunt. His fire burned brighter than ever, yet inside his heart was no longer just fury, it was purpose, sharpened like the edge of a blade. For 2 long shadows had wormed their way into his home, feeding on the silence, but silence would end tonight. The Maid, still shaken but safe under heavy guard, had given him what she knew. The guards had mapped out hidden tunnels like veins spreading through the palace walls. The traitors were clever, but in their arrogance they had left traces, scents of ash, scratches of claws, drops of blood where none should be. The Emperor studied these signs not like a ruler but like a predator, each detail another step leading to the heart of his prey. At dawn, he stood before his gathered guards in the Hall of Flame. Their armor gleamed like liquid steel, their eyes hardened with resolve. Yet even the bravest among them could not hide the tension that crept along their spines. They had all seen the gate, the whispering circle beneath the palace. They knew this was not just betrayal of empire but an alliance with something beyond the stars. The Emperor's voice cut through the silence like fire through ice. They believe they can open a door to my ruin. They believe I will fear what waits beyond. But fire fears nothing. Fire consumes all. Tonight, we end their whispers. Tonight, shadows meet the sun. The roar that followed was fierce and loyal, but it could not drown out the pulse that seemed to echo from beneath their feet. Even here, in the highest hall, the traitor's machine thrummed faintly like a heartbeat too far away, a reminder that time was short. The hunt began as the sun fell. The Emperor himself led the vanguard into the underlevels, his fire lighting the dark corridors. The golden walls above gave way to stone scarred with hidden symbols and markings, sigils meant to channel power from both dragon flame and human craft. The deeper they went, the louder the hum of the machine grew, until it filled the air like a storm building just beyond the horizon. At last they came upon the first of the traitors. Cloaked figures crouched in a circle around a shard of the machine, their hands raised as they chanted in low, twisted voices. They did not see the guards approach, not until the Emperor's fire lit the chamber like dawn. For a heartbeat they froze, their faces hidden by masks of bone and metal. Then one of them screamed, a sound too sharp, too unnatural, and lunged forward with a blade. The guards moved to intercept, but the Emperor was faster. His claw caught the traitor midair, crushing armor and bone with a single motion. The fire in his chest burst outward, incinerating 2 more before they could rise. The others fled into the tunnels, their chants breaking into panic. After them, the Emperor thundered, his voice shaking the stone. The chase tore through the underlevels. Corridors lit with fire as the guards cut down shadow after shadow. Yet for every traitor that fell, 2 more seemed to rise. They had been living here longer than anyone guessed, servants who vanished into the walls, guards who had sworn loyalty but bent their knees in secret. The betrayal cut deep, but the Emperor's fire cut deeper still. At last they reached the great chamber again, the gate. But now it was alive, brighter and more terrible than before. Its surface rippled with crimson light, arcs of energy leaping across the room. The traitors stood around it in numbers too great to count, their chanting rising like a storm. At their head stood a figure cloaked in silver, taller than the rest, his mask marked with the jagged symbol of the gate itself. His voice thundered above the others. "The Emperor comes. Let him watch his empire fall." The chamber erupted into chaos. Blades clashed, fire roared, screams echoed against the stone. The guards fought with unmatched discipline, their weapons tearing through cloaks and masks, but the traitors fought like those who no longer feared death. The gate pulsed faster with every heartbeat, its whispers now screams, and from its surface shapes began to press outward, hands with too many claws, faces without eyes, forms that belonged to no creature of this world. The Emperor hurled himself into the fray, a storm of fire and fury. Every strike of his claw shattered armor, every roar of his breath melted stone. Yet even as he fought, his eyes never left the silver-cloaked figure. There was no mistaking it now. This was the heart of the treachery, the one who had woven the lies, the one who had dared to bring this shadow into his home. He carved a path through the battlefield, leaving ash in his wake, until at last he stood face to face with the traitor leader. The silver mask tilted upward, and from behind it came a voice that was both human and dragon, twisted into something monstrous. "You cannot stop it, Emperor. The gate is already open. Beyond it waits a power greater than your fire, greater than your throne. Bow now, and you may yet live as its servant." The Emperor's eyes blazed like suns. "I am no servant. I am fire." The silver figure laughed, a sound that echoed with voices not his own. Then he raised his hand, and the gate behind him flared, its light spilling across the chamber. The ground shook, and the whispers became screams, no longer distant but near, as though whatever lay beyond was already stepping through. The Emperor spread his wings wide, his fire surging to its peak. He roared so loudly it silenced the chamber for a heartbeat. "Then let it come, and let it burn." The clash that followed shook the very foundations of the palace. Fire met shadow, loyalty met betrayal, and at the heart of it all, the fate of the empire balanced on the edge of the gate. The final battle had begun, and there could be no turning back.